Welcome to the comfy zone. Make yourself at home.
It was a dark and stormy night when I first heard about the smiling kid. I was huddled up in my bed scrolling through social media when a post caught my attention. It was a warning from a friend telling everyone to be careful when they saw a child smiling at them in the dark. According to the post, the smiling kid was a supernatural entity that preyed on those who let their guard down. At first, I didn't think much of it. It sounded like another urban legend or ghost story. But as I read more about the smiling kid, my unease grew. People were reporting sightings of a child with an unnaturally wide smile, always appearing in the shadows or on the edge of their vision. Some claimed that the entity had followed them home, leaving behind a sense of dread and foreboding. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but as the night went on, I couldn't shake the idea that something was watching me. I kept hearing creaks and whispers, and every time I turned around, I half expected to see the smiling kid standing in the corner, grinning at me with razor-sharp teeth. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep, but my dreams were filled with visions of the smiling kid. In every scenario, the kid was standing just out of reach, beckoning me closer with its eerie smile. When I woke up, I was covered in a cold sweat, and I knew that the smiling kid was more than just a myth. It was a real and dangerous entity that I needed to avoid at all costs. According to the rumors and stories, the smiling kid was not just a passive observer. Many people claimed that it had an eerie, supernatural power that could bend reality itself. Some said that if the smiling kid smiled at you, it would make you forget your own name and identity, leaving you lost and confused in a world that no longer made sense. Others reported feeling a strange sensation when they looked directly at it, as if their very essence was being drained away. There were even stories of the smiling kid possessing its victims, taking control of their bodies and using them to spread its influence to others. And the worst part was, no one knew exactly what the smiling kid wanted or why it existed. It seemed to be an entity that existed solely to cause fear and chaos. As the rumors and stories continued to spread, more and more people began to report sightings of the smiling kid. Some claimed to have seen it lurking in the corners of their rooms, while others reported hearing its unnerving laughter echoing through the halls. And as the number of reports grew, so did the fear that the smiling kid was becoming stronger and more dangerous with each passing day. Despite the warnings, some people still sought out the smiling kid, drawn to its enigmatic and terrifying presence. But for most, the mere mention of its name was enough to send shivers down their spine, a constant reminder that they were never truly alone, and that there was always something out there waiting for them in the darkness. Days turned into weeks, and my initial fear of the smiling kid slowly subsided. I convinced myself that it was just another internet hoax, and that there was nothing to be afraid of. But then, one fateful night, everything changed. I was home alone, lying in bed with the lights off, scrolling through my phone when I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone. It was a soft, eerie giggle coming from somewhere in the darkness. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me, but then I heard it again, louder and more insistent. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw it. The smiling kid. It was standing in the corner of my room, barely visible in the shadows, but its wide, toothy grin was unmistakable. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was as if the creature from my nightmares had stepped out of my dreams and into reality. I tried to scream, to run away, but I was frozen in place, unable to move or speak. The smiling kid took a step forward, its gaze fixed on me, and that's when I felt it. The strange sensation that others had described. It was as if the world around me was fading away, leaving me alone with the smiling kid and its unnerving grin. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed with fear, but eventually the smiling kid turned and vanished into the darkness. I was left alone in my room, shaken and trembling, but somehow unharmed. After the smiling kid vanished that night, I lay there in bed trembling with fear and wondering if it would come back. But as the minutes ticked by and the darkness remained undisturbed, I began to convince myself that it had all been a hallucination. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. For the next few days, I tried to put the incident out of my mind. I went about my daily routine, went to work, met up with friends, and even managed to get a few nights of decent sleep. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was something lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. Then, one night as I was getting ready for bed, I heard that soft, eerie giggle once again. My heart leaped into my throat as I spun around, and there it was, the smiling kid, standing in the doorway to my room. This time I didn't freeze up. I screamed at the top of my lungs and charged towards the door, ready to escape. But as I got closer, I felt that strange sensation once again, the one that made me feel like the world around me was fading away. Suddenly, the smiling kid was standing right in front of me, its toothy grin inches away from my face. I could feel its breath on my skin, and I was paralyzed with terror. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the smiling kid was gone, vanished into thin air. I was left standing there, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. After that second encounter with the smiling kid, I knew that I was in real danger. It seemed like the creature was becoming more powerful with each passing day, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before something bad happened. I started to research everything I could about the smiling kid. I read countless accounts from people who claimed to have encountered it, and I scoured the internet for any information that might help me stop it. But no matter how much I learned, I still felt powerless in the face of such a terrifying and otherworldly creature. And then one night, it happened. I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I heard that soft, eerie giggle once again. I knew that the smiling kid was there, in the room with me, and I was filled with a sense of dread. As I lay there, paralyzed with fear, I felt something brush against my leg. I screamed and kicked out, trying to fend off whatever was touching me, but it was too late. The smiling kid had possessed me. For what felt like an eternity, I was trapped in my own body, watching as the smiling kid used me to terrorize my friends and family. I could see everything that was happening, but I was powerless to stop it. It was as if the smiling kid had taken control of my mind and body. There was nothing I could do to fight back. When the smiling kid finally released me from its grip, I was left shaken and traumatized. I knew that I had to find a way to stop it before it hurt anyone else. But no matter what I did, I couldn't seem to shake the smiling kid's hold on me. I was haunted by its presence, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened. Despite my best efforts to warn my friends and family about the smiling kid, no one believed me when I told them what had happened. They thought I was just suffering from some kind of mental breakdown, and that my encounters with the smiling kid were just hallucinations brought on by stress. But I knew the truth. I had been possessed by the smiling kid, and I had seen firsthand the terror that it could unleash. It used me to terrorize my friends and family, showing up in their nightmares, making strange noises in their homes, and leaving mysterious messages on their phones. Even now, years later, I sometimes feel like the smiling kid still has control of me. I can hear its laughter in my dreams, and sometimes I wake up with the feeling of dread, as if it's still watching me, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. I know that I'll never be free of the smiling kid's influence, no matter how hard I try to escape it. It's a creature of pure evil, and it will always be out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. And so, I write this story as a warning to anyone who might encounter the smiling kid. Don't make the same mistakes that I did. If you ever hear that soft, eerie giggle in the darkness, run as fast as you can, and never look back. Because once the smiling kid has its hooks in you, there's no escaping its grasp.
Welcome to the comfy zone. Make yourself at home.
I found the book at a used bookstore, hidden away among stacks of other forgotten titles. It was a Goosebumps book, but one I had never heard of before. The title read, The Faceless Family. I was intrigued, having been a fan of the series as a kid. I flipped through the pages, scanning the eerie illustrations and reading the synopsis on the back cover. But as I began to read the first few chapters, something felt off. The writing was just like I remembered it, but the story was too real, too unsettling. The family in the book had just moved into a new house, and strange things were happening. Photos of them with their faces missing were hanging on the walls. They were experiencing inexplicable occurrences. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling of unease creeping up my spine. It was just a story, a work of fiction. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I looked in the mirror, it felt like my face was fading away, like I was becoming one of the faceless family. Strange occurrences started happening around me, just like in the book. Photos of me with my family and friends, with our faces missing, started popping up on my phone. I started hearing whispers in my ear, and my dreams were filled with faceless entities chasing me through dark corridors. I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had been consuming me ever since I stumbled upon the Faceless Family. The more I read, the more it felt like the story was coming to life around me. I decided to do some research on the book, hoping to find some explanation for the strange occurrences I was experiencing. As I delved deeper into my investigation, I stumbled upon a thread on an obscure forum that discussed the Faceless Family. According to the post, the book was never supposed to be released, as it was deemed too disturbing and unsettling. But somehow a few copies had made their way into circulation, and the story had started to spread like wildfire. The post went on to describe the reason why the book was deemed too disturbing. It seemed that the author, R.L. Stine, had based the story on a real-life family who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The police had found their home filled with photographs with their faces missing, and strange symbols etched into the walls. The family was never found, and the case had remained unsolved to this day. The thread was filled with testimonies from people who had read the book and claimed to have experienced strange occurrences after doing so. Some claimed to have seen faceless entities lurking in the shadows, while others reported feeling like their own faces were disappearing. The more I read, the more I felt like I was descending into madness. The story was just too real, too unsettling. And the fact that it was based on a real-life family who had disappeared without a trace sent shivers down my spine. What had I gotten myself into? As I continued to read, I came across a description of a scene in The Faceless Family, where the main character, a young girl, discovers that the missing faces from the family photographs had been replaced with her own face. This scene was particularly unsettling, and it sent chills down my spine. But as I tried to push the thought out of my mind, something else happened that made it all the more real. I was in my bathroom, washing my face, when I noticed something strange in the mirror. The faces of my family members and the photographs on the wall behind me had been replaced with my own face. My heart started racing, and I felt like I was going to pass out. As I tried to process what was happening, I noticed that the symbols etched into the walls of the bathroom were the same symbols that were described in the thread about the book. It was as if the book was coming to life around me, and I was trapped in its pages. Despite my growing fear, I couldn't stop reading The Faceless Family. The story had completely consumed me, and I had to know how it ended. As I read on, the situation for the family in the book became increasingly dire. They began to realize that the entity erasing their faces was not of this world, and that it had been summoned by a dark ritual that had been performed by the previous owners of the house. In the final chapters, the family discovered that the ritual could be reversed, but at a terrible cost. They would have to offer up their own faces in exchange for the return of their loved ones' faces. It was a horrifying proposition, but they had no choice. As I finished the book, I felt like I was going to be sick. The thought of losing my own face, of being trapped in this nightmare forever, was too much to bear. I realized that the book had become my reality, and that I was living out the same fate as the family in its pages. I was afraid to leave my house, afraid that I would encounter the same fate as the family in the book. I could hear whispers in my ear, and the feeling of being watched never left me. I knew that I had to do something, but I didn't know what. And then, one day, I received a package in the mail. It was a single sheet of paper with the message scrawled in red ink. "Return the book or suffer the consequences," it said. I knew then that I had to do whatever it took to end this nightmare, to break free from the curse of the Faceless family. I immediately packed up the book and drove to the local post office. I shipped it off to the return address that was listed on the paper, hoping that it would end the curse and free me from the grips of the book. But even after I returned the book, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The whispers in my ear continued, and I could swear that I could hear the sounds of someone breathing behind me. It was as if the curse had become a part of me, and I would never be able to escape it. Weeks passed, and I started to believe that maybe the curse was finally broken. The whispers had stopped, and the feeling of being watched had subsided. But just as I was starting to let my guard down, I received another package in the mail. Inside was a single photograph, and I immediately recognized it as one of the family photos that hung in my living room. But something was different. The faces of my family members had been replaced with my own face, just like in the book. My heart sank as I realized that the curse was far from over. I was still trapped in the pages of the Faceless family, and I had no idea how to break free. I frantically searched for answers, poring over books and scouring the internet for any information on the cursed tome. But my efforts were fruitless, as I found no one who had experienced anything like what I was going through. As days turned into weeks, the curse grew stronger. I began to feel like I was losing myself, as if I was slowly being erased from existence. And the worst part was that I could feel the curse spreading to those around me. My family and friends began to act strange, their faces twisted and distorted, as if they too were being consumed by the curse. In a last-ditch effort to break the curse, I visited a local library to continue my investigation. I searched through the archives, trying to find any information on the strange book. But after all my searching, I still couldn't find any record of this book existing outside of the forums I found online. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that the curse was slowly consuming me. My reflection in the mirror was becoming more and more distorted, my face slowly melting away like wax. Even my own memories were beginning to fade, as if they were being erased from existence. I was losing myself, and I knew that I had to act fast. I searched frantically for any clues, any shred of information that would help me break the curse. But as time passed, it became clear that there was no escape. I could feel the curse spreading, infecting everything around me. My family and friends continued acting strange, their faces twisted and distorted, just like in the book. And as I looked out into the world, I could see that the curse was spreading beyond just my immediate circle, infecting everyone it touched. As the days passed, I could feel myself slipping away. Memories and feelings that had once been so clear were now hazy and indistinct. Even my own reflection was becoming distorted, as if I was fading away into nothingness. I knew that the curse was consuming me, that I was becoming just like the Faceless family in the cursed book. But even as I fought against the curse, I could feel it pulling me in, dragging me down into the abyss of nothingness. In the end, there was nothing left of me but a faint echo, a memory of a person that had once existed, and even that memory was beginning to fade, as if I was being erased from existence. I knew that I was running out of time, that soon I would be gone forever, but even as I tried to hold on to myself, I knew that it was a losing battle. The curse had won, and there was no escape. As I felt myself slipping away, I thought of the Faceless family, of the cursed book that had brought this upon me. And then, in a final moment of clarity, I realized that once I had read the book, my fate was sealed. And worst of all, it was still out there, still waiting for its next victim. And then, everything went black.
Welcome to the comfy zone. Make yourself at home.
My name's Jack, and I'm a YouTuber. Along with my friends, we run a channel where we film ourselves doing various challenges. From extreme sports to eating competitions, we've tried it all. But nothing could have prepared us for what we were about to face. A few weeks ago, I received an email from a wealthy benefactor who owned an abandoned orphanage called Whispering Shadows. The email read, "Greetings, Jack. I've been a fan of your channel for some time now, and I have a proposition for you. I have a property that's in dire need of some publicity, and I believe that you and your friends could provide just that. I own an abandoned orphanage called Whispering Shadows, and I'd like you to spend a night there. If you're able to survive until morning, you'll be rewarded with $100,000. But be warned, the orphanage is haunted and has claimed many victims in the past." At first, I thought it was a prank or a scam, but after doing some research, I found out that the orphanage was indeed real and had a dark history. It was rumored that the orphans who lived there were mistreated and abused, and some had even died under mysterious circumstances. The thought of staying there was terrifying, but the reward was too great to pass up. After reading the email from the wealthy benefactor, I knew that this was an opportunity of a lifetime. I immediately called my friends to discuss the proposition. "Guys, I just received an email from a wealthy benefactor who wants us to stay a night in a haunted orphanage called Whispering Shadows," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "What? Are you crazy?" Chris exclaimed. "Why would someone pay us to stay in a haunted orphanage?" "I don't know, it sounds kinda cool," Sarah chimed in. "We could turn it into a challenge for the channel." "I agree with Chris," Mike said, looking skeptical. "Why would someone want to get publicity for a haunted orphanage? It doesn't make sense." "I don't know, but I did some research and the orphanage has a dark history. It was rumored that the orphans who lived there were mistreated and abused, and some had even died under mysterious circumstances. It's perfect for our channel," I replied, trying to convince them. "I don't know, man," Chris said, shaking his head. "It sounds too good to be true." "Think about it, guys. We can make a lot of money from this, and we'll have an amazing video for the channel. We can't pass up this opportunity," I said, trying to persuade them. After some more discussion, my friends agreed to take on the challenge and head to Whispering Shadows. With my friends finally on board, we started to prepare for the challenge. We packed our bags with essentials like flashlights, snacks, and blankets. I even brought a camera drone to get some aerial shots of the orphanage. As we drove to Whispering Shadows, my excitement was palpable. But as we got closer, my excitement started to turn into nervousness. The orphanage looked even creepier up close, with broken windows and overgrown vines covering the walls. "Are you sure we should do this, Jack?" Sarah asked, looking worried. "Don't worry, we'll be fine. We have each other," I replied, trying to reassure her. But as we stepped inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of our footsteps on the creaky floorboards. As we explored the orphanage, I noticed strange markings on the walls and floor. They looked like they had been made by someone or something. My skepticism started to turn into fear, and I started to regret taking on this challenge. "Guys, I don't think we should stay here. This place is giving me the creeps," I said, my voice trembling. "Come on, Jack, don't be such a wimp. We can do this," Chris replied, trying to boost my confidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, and I knew that we were in for a long and terrifying night. "Hey guys, we're here at Whispering Shadows, an abandoned orphanage with a dark and mysterious past," I said, speaking to the camera as we walked through the main hall. "We've been given the opportunity to stay the night and make it out with $100,000. But as you can see, this place is seriously creepy. Mike panned the camera around to show the decrepit surroundings of the orphanage, highlighting the peeling paint, broken windows, and boarded-up doors. As you can see, we're not alone here. This place is filled with ghosts and spirits, and we're here to find out if we can make it through the night, Sarah added, her voice trembling slightly. But we're not doing this alone. We have all of you watching and supporting us, Chris said, addressing our audience. So let's do this. Let's survive a night in Whispering Shadows. We continued to explore the orphanage, looking for a safe place to set up our base camp. As we walked down one of the hallways, we heard a strange noise coming from one of the rooms. Did you guys hear that? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Yeah, it sounded like a whisper, Mike said, looking around nervously. We cautiously approached the room, and as we opened the door, we were hit by a blast of cold air. The room was freezing, and we could see our breaths in the air. This is crazy. I don't think we should be here, Sarah said, shivering. But we had a job to do, and we couldn't back down now. We set up our camp in the room, and as the night wore on, the sounds of footsteps and whispers echoed through the halls. We knew we weren't alone, and we were in for a long and terrifying night. As the night wore on, the sense of unease and fear grew stronger. We heard strange noises and saw shadows moving in the corners of our eyes, but nothing could prepare us for what happened next. I was sitting alone in one of the rooms, filming myself for the YouTube channel, when I heard a faint whispering sound. It was almost inaudible at first, but as I listened closely, the whispers grew louder and clearer. I turned around and saw a ghostly figure standing in the corner of the room. It was a little girl, dressed in a tattered dress and with long, dark hair covering her face. She was staring at me with hollow black eyes. I froze in terror, unable to move or speak. The air in the room grew cold, and I could see my breaths in the air. The little girl started to move towards me, her movements jerky and unnatural. I tried to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I stumbled and fell, hitting my head on the floor. As I looked up, I saw the little girl standing over me, her face inches away from mine. Her breath was cold and smelled of decay, and I could feel her icy fingers on my skin. I screamed, but no sound came out. The little girl let out a blood-curdling scream, and everything went black. When I woke up, my friends were hovering over me, looking worried. "Jack, are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with concern. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, my mind reeling from what had just happened. The little girl had vanished, leaving me shaken and terrified. I knew then that we had to get out of Whispering Shadows as soon as possible. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, my voice shaking with fear. "See what?" Chris asked, looking at me quizzically. "The little girl, she was right there," I said, pointing to the corner of the room. "I didn't see anything," Mike said, shaking his head. "I was outside trying to fix the generator," Sarah added. "What happened?" I explained what had just happened to me, but they all looked at me like I was crazy. They hadn't seen or heard anything. "I think we need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. "Something bad's gonna happen if we stay." But we had a job to do, and we couldn't let our fear get the better of us. We continued to explore the orphanage, hoping to find clues that would lead us to the $100,000 prize. As the night wore on, the strange occurrences continued. Doors slammed shut on their own. Objects moved without explanation, and we heard disembodied voices calling out to us. But the worst was yet to come. As we were exploring one of the upper floors, we heard a loud banging sound coming from one of the rooms. We cautiously approached the door, and as we opened it, we were hit by a wave of cold air. Inside the room, we saw a figure standing in the center. It was a woman, dressed in a white gown, and her eyes were glowing red. She let out an unearthly scream, and we knew then that we had to get out of Whispering Shadows as soon as possible. We ran out of the room, our hearts racing, and headed for the exit. But the door wouldn't budge. We were trapped. The woman in the white gown was getting closer, her eyes still glowing red, and her screams getting louder. We were paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, a loud voice boomed through the orphanage.
"This is the owner of the property. I've been watching you, and I'm impressed. You've passed my test. The door is now unlocked. You may leave and collect your reward."
We didn't need to be told twice. We ran towards the door, pushing and shoving each other in our haste to get out. As we stumbled out into the night air, we could hear the woman's screams growing fainter and fainter behind us. Once we were safely outside, we collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. It was only then that I remembered something I'd read about the orphanage. "The woman in the white gown," I said, between gasps. "I think she's the same woman who ran this place. She was known for being cruel to the orphans." My friends looked at me, their eyes wide with surprise. "How do you know that?" Chris asked. "I did some research before we came here," I said. "I wanted to be prepared, but I never expected anything like this to happen." We sat there in silence for a few moments, catching our breath and trying to process what had just happened. We got up and dusted ourselves off, looking around for the owner of the property, but there was no sign of him. We walked around the orphanage, calling out his name, but the only response was the sound of the wind whistling through the empty corridors. As we made our way towards the front of the building, we heard another sound, a faint whisper coming from one of the rooms. We cautiously approached the room and opened the door, expecting to find the owner of the property waiting for us. Instead, we found a male ghost, with sunken eyes and pale, translucent skin. His hair was matted and his clothes were tattered and torn. He looked at us with a haunting expression, and we knew that we had been set up. The voice we had heard earlier had not been the owner of the property at all, but rather the ghost of one of the orphanage's former residents. We had been lured here under false pretenses, and now we were trapped in a haunted building with no way out. We tried to run, but the ghost seemed to be blocking our path. We were stuck, with no way out and no one to help us. It was then that we realized the true horror of our situation, and the realization filled us with a bone-chilling terror that we could not shake. The ghost moved closer, and we could see that his eyes were filled with an unfathomable darkness. His mouth opened, and a chilling scream echoed through the orphanage. Suddenly, the walls began to shake, and the floor beneath our feet started to crumble. We stumbled and fell, and as we hit the ground, we saw a horde of twisted, demonic creatures emerging from the walls. Their eyes glowed red, and their skin was dark and scaly. They reached out for us with their clawed hands, and we could feel their hot breath on our faces. We scrambled to our feet and tried to run, but they were too fast. They chased us through the corridors of the orphanage, their screams echoing in our ears. We ran past rooms filled with twisted, grotesque figures, their bodies contorted and twisted beyond recognition. The air was thick with the stench of death and decay, and we could feel our sanity slipping away with every passing moment. As we ran, we could see glimpses of the ghost watching us from the shadows. His eyes followed us wherever we went, and we knew that we were not alone in this haunted place. Finally, we stumbled into a room, and as we looked around, we realized that we had found the source of the haunting. The room was filled with twisted, demonic objects, and we could feel the energy in the air vibrating with a terrible power. As we looked around, we could see the ghost hovering in the corner of the room. His eyes were filled with a terrible fury, and we knew that we were in grave danger. Suddenly, the walls of the room began to close in, and we could feel the weight of the entire building crushing down on us. We screamed and cried out for help, but there was no one to hear us. We were alone in this haunted orphanage, and there was no way out. The pressure of the walls closing in became unbearable, and I could feel myself losing consciousness. My vision blurred, and my thoughts became jumbled as my body struggled to cope with the overwhelming force. And then, darkness consumed me. When I finally came to, I was lying on the ground, my body aching and my head pounding. I looked around and saw that I was in the same room, but the walls were no longer closing in. It was morning, and the light of day was streaming in through the windows. Chris was standing nearby, looking down with a mixture of concern and relief. He had managed to keep the camera rolling throughout the entire ordeal, and I knew that the footage would be some of our most compelling yet. I sat up slowly, taking in the reality of what had just happened. We had survived a night in one of the most haunted places on Earth, and had been tormented by ghosts and demonic creatures beyond imagining. But as I looked at my friends, I knew that we had been forever changed by the experience. The horrors we had witnessed would stay with us for the rest of our lives, and we could never truly escape the trauma of that night. As we gathered our things and prepared to leave the orphanage, I knew that we had made a grave mistake by accepting the challenge. But it was too late to turn back now. We had faced our fears and survived, but at what cost? When I got home, I eagerly plugged the camera into my computer to review the footage, but what I saw on the screen made my blood run cold. The video was not what I remembered. Instead, it was a bizarre and unsettling montage of disjointed images and strange, otherworldly sounds. The footage was glitchy and distorted, with faces and figures that seemed to appear out of nowhere, disappearing just as quickly. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but it was impossible. The footage was like something out of a nightmare, and it left me feeling deeply unsettled. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had made a terrible mistake by accepting the challenge. The events of that night had changed us in ways that we couldn't even begin to comprehend, and the footage seemed to be a testament to that fact. As I closed the file and shut off my computer, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lay hidden within the walls of the orphanage. And I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that we would never be able to escape the dark legacy of that cursed place.